All right, so it is December 5th, 2020, and we are excited to have David Kudler presenting to us about book covers. Um, Most of our membership uh, knows David pretty well. David's been a member close to forever, right? Close
Well,
to
7, 8 years at
7 or
this
8
point.
years.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it feels
Close.
like forever because it's about as long as I've been a member. And so, um, but incredibly knowledgeable and experienced in all these many aspects of indie publishing. He's really one of our great resources in BAIPA. So thank you so much, David. I'm going to let you share a little more about yourself and your publishing company, and I turn it over to you. I will monitor questions in the chat. So if
Thank you.
people do have questions, please stay muted, but go ahead and put your questions in chat. And then when David is ready to take questions, uh, I will uh, I will facilitate that piece. So take it away, David.
Okay. My name is David Kudler. I have been in publishing since the 80s. I was a copy editor for a whole bunch of computer magazines back in the 80s as a side gig for my acting career. And edited all the way up until the 90s when I got hired by the Joseph Campbell Foundation to be the managing editor of the collected works of Joseph Campbell. And I, at the time, was a word guy. I don't think of myself as an enormously visual person, although I've also directed theater. I tend to be focused on the language, was always my background. And one of the things that the head of the foundation trained me to do is he said, you need to start thinking about this stuff visually as well, because a lot of our books were illustrated. And I was also, as time went on, became not just the managing editor, but basically a one-man publishing company, publishing audio and occasionally video. And as we added ebooks in the early part of the previous decade, so, starting around 2009, 2010, I started creating ebooks. And when I started creating ebooks, I discovered I had to create covers for these ebooks. And once I realized that I was a one-man publishing company, because I was an editor, a designer, audio producer, I was doing all of this different stuff, ebook developer. I opened Still Point Digital Press, which was, I didn't know what it was going to be, but I figured it was some combination of a publishing company and a publishing services provider. And that's basically what I've been doing for the last 8 years, in addition to my continuing work for the Campbell Foundation. And I have learned a huge amount, going from being a guy who really did think of himself very much as a word guy, to having to think in terms of visuals and marketing. And that's what covers are all about. Last year, when I gave basically a similar presentation, I opened it with a line saying, your mother told you you can't tell a book by its cover. Well, my mother was actually at the talk last year, and she said, I never said that to you. Well, she said things like that. And the fact of the matter is, it's very true about just about everything in our lives, right? You don't want to prejudice yourself. You don't want to make assumptions about something based on how it looks. The one thing that I can promise you that it doesn't apply to is books. Because in fact, the whole point of a book cover is so that you can tell what's inside. And whether or not people should judge a book by its cover, they do it every day. And it is your largest and most important piece of marketing. It is one of the most important pieces of what's called metadata, which is the digital information that bookstores use to keep track of and make your book available to readers, whether it's a a brick and mortar store or an online store. And so book covers, for better or worse, are really one of our most important tools in terms of getting our books out there. Yes, the words need to be brilliant. Yes, the layout of the interior should be, at the very least, not bad. It should actually communicate what's going on in the book. But the fact of the matter is, the first thing that anybody's going to see when they see your book in a store or on a shelf at somebody else's house is the cover. And so, like all of us, I have had to learn what it is that makes a cover worth putting on the front of a book. So let's talk about, there we go. What I'm going to talk about today. The first part, I'm going to talk about the promises that your book cover has to be able to make, okay? I'm going to share some do's and don'ts. I'm going to look at the differences between print, ebook, and audiobook covers. That's pretty quick. I hope I'll have a little time to look at the, without prejudice, not trying to influence anybody's vote, but I hope I'm going to actually jump over and be able to share the contest covers, because there's some beautiful covers there, and I actually think some of them have things to offer about what I'm going to be talking about today, and then we'll have time hopefully at the end for Q&A. And then unfortunately, I'm going to need to disappear because I'm driving the rest of the way up to Seattle today. So I won't be able to be here for the interviews, but I would wish, I will look forward to hearing the recordings of those. Okay. Becky, yeah, okay, you got that. Okay, so let's talk about the promises that your cover makes. Again, a cover is what your people, people are going to judge your book on. And so what the cover needs to be able to do as a marketing tool is to communicate a promise to the potential reader. This is what you're going to get. Okay, that's what the cover is there to do, to communicate 3 promises. And the first promise is it will communicate genre or category. Okay, I'm largely involved in fiction, so we talk genre. But if you wanted to look at category, which is a more common way of putting it, BISAC category, Dewey Decimal, whatever. The first thing that your cover needs to do is tell the potential reader, this is what genre this is. This is where this book should be shelved in the library, okay, or in the bookstore. And it should do that really quickly. So everybody looking at this clearly knows this is a murder mystery set in outer space, right? This is clearly a romance. And it communicates that extremely efficiently. We don't see anybody doing anything. They're behind a nice umbrella. I believe, is set in Paris. I think you can see the Eiffel Tower in the background, but that's not the important part. The important part is that you got a lady in a red dress and a guy in a tuxedo or a suit, and they're kissing behind a red umbrella. And to be honest, in the case of this particular book, the biggest promise that it communicates in terms of genre is the name of the author, because even I, who am not a huge traditional romance reader, know who Danielle Steele is, okay? Most of us do not have that brand. So for us, the name shouldn't be a third of the cover. But for Danielle Steele, who all you need to know is, oh, it's a Danielle Steele book. If you're a person who likes Danielle Steele, all you need to do is look at that and the title, and you know it's a new book, and you'll buy it. Okay? But the rest of it is still very good at communicating exactly what genre this fits into. I would submit that this next book here is likewise a very clear genre. That is not a mystery. That is not a epic fantasy. That is not anything like that. That is a science fiction book. You got a robot, you got outer space. That's a science fiction book. And that's one of mine, so I'm rather pleased with it. Genre is a very funny thing because you've got the old pulp genres. You've got romance and science fiction, mystery, thriller, horror, westerns, and many subgenres of that, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But it's easy to forget that nonfiction categories and literary fiction is a genre, okay? And so here we have probably, one of the better known literary lit-fic covers of the last decade. I could have also used 10Q4, 19Q4, what is it? Anyway, wonderful Japanese book, amazing cover. But this one is wonderful too. With literary fiction, it's a little less clear what's going on, but you can look at this and it's got a seriousness about it. There's still something mysterious and playful. You'll notice the font that they use for the text. It looks like very rough charcoal or chalk, and then you've got that torn feeling. It's communicating this is an interesting book. There's something going on mysterious here, and so it invites the reader in. It's a promise. It's also an invitation. Okay. Now, there's genre. There's also subgenre. And each of these genres that I'm showing you here has subgenres. And subgenre is, if you're, talking about, thriller and mystery shelf at your local bookstore, well, they might have it, split up into gumshoe detective, cozy mysteries, thrillers, a whole bunch of little tiny niche categories. And those are just as important because what communicates these genres is only part of it. There's more. Let me show you some examples. This is one of mine too. And this is the same genre as the Danielle Steele, okay? And you'll notice the author's name is nowhere nearly as big because Katie West ain't anywhere nearly well known as Danielle Steele. But this communicates a certain kind of book that is different in specifics than the Danielle Steele book, while still being under the romance genre, okay? And somebody who likes First Sight is not necessarily going to be as excited about The Visitor Has Company, for example. Each of these is making a different promise. And the reader comes wanting a particular kind of book, whether they know they want that kind of book or not, by the way. In many cases, my wife and I read a lot of cozy mysteries. So I am very aware of what a cozy mystery cover should look like, okay? There's not gonna be a lot of gore, okay? There's not gonna be dark shadows and that kind of thing. We read it right before we go to bed, and I don't want to be anxious as I'm reading. Well, in this case, the Danielle Steele is promising a book for two people in a relationship. The Katie West book is promising three people in a relationship. The Katie West book has three people who are in a various stages of undress. The Danielle Steele, the lady is in a lovely red dress and the man is in a suit. These are different promises, okay? And the more efficiently you can communicate that kind of difference, the better. And again, the reader may not come knowing what kind of romance book they want to read, what kind of science fiction book, what kind of literary fiction. They may just come saying, I want to read a book about robots. Well, there's lots of different kinds of books about robots. And so whether it's a mystery, a thriller, a dystopian social commentary, the cover needs to communicate that quickly, okay? So two different, this is another one of mine. These are two different science fiction. We've got robot and Earth, and we've got steampunk, okay? And these are different. And the tone is going to be different. We'll talk about tone in a minute too. And so a reader who comes looking for one is not necessarily looking for the other. Likewise, literary fiction is another wonderful book. The feeling that is communicated by these two different covers, these are both beautiful covers, okay? And I think, I haven't read the Ann Patchett book, but certainly the Goldfinch cover communicates what's going on inside, and I trust that the Ann Patchett book does as well. So the idea is not just that you are going to broadly say, well, this is the kind of book it is, but you're going to give a really clear idea of the niche that your book falls into, that the cover needs to communicate that. And we'll talk about how you do that in a minute. It's also, okay, so the way that you discover, first of all, what subgenre you need to fit into and what that should look like is going and looking on the shelves, whether that's at the library, at your local bookstore, excuse me. I apologize. Or going on Amazon or barnesandnoble.com or whatever online bookstore you want. If you look at the books that are closest to your kind of book, you can often, Amazon will show you down where it will show you the ranking. It will show you also the categories that the book falls into, but not just the broad categories. It'll often show you very fine categories. So my book, Risiko, is a young adult book. It's a young adult historical book. It's a young adult historical book set in Asia. That is a fairly narrow subgenre of young adult, okay? So when you look at, okay, what should my cover communicate? One of the first things you should look at is, what are the other books in my subgenre? Well, how do they look? What do they look like? One of the things that you will discover is that for each of these subgenres, there are what are called tropes. And tropes in publishing, and I'm sure other arts as well, it's basically positive cliches. They are things that, motifs that readers expect. So if it is a gumshoe mystery, the reader expects a gunfight at some point. If it's a Western, a gunfight, same thing. If it's, clean romance, sweet romance, which no sex, but there will at some point late be at least one kiss, unless it's Jane Austen, in which case they never kiss. What the tropes in terms of the covers are, you can look at what is the color palette, okay? I will point out that in romance, the color palette is very warm, okay? You will tend to run towards the warm end of the color wheel. In science fiction and fantasy, it tends to be cooler. Fantasy tends to be more earth-toned. than science fiction, which often tends to be fairly cool and dark, like that cover you got there. Literary fiction is a little all over the place, and it says there, no tropes in literary fiction. It's about the book, but it's also about communicating, you know, what kind of a book. If you, excuse me, I need to, there we go. If you look at each of the covers on this shelf that you're looking at, whether it's online or off, there will be clues to subgenre on every cover. And you need to look at ones that repeat. So the repeating elements, again, color, are there, you know, laser guns showing up on all of these, you know, women with swords. We'll talk about that later. Look for the tropes, okay? Because those are the things that will help communicate your subgenre and genre to your reader. Now, having said that, there are times when you should ignore the tropes, because no book is a living embodiment of the stereotype, right? No person is, no book is. So if you decide that, okay, well, I'm doing a, you know, epic fantasy with a strong female heroine, you'll see there's a bazillion of those kinds of books with a woman with a sword on her back or at her hip, or she's holding it, or, I mean, you know, it's a very trope-filled book cover subgenre. But if you decide you don't want to do that, there are other things that you can use to communicate the subgenre without going straight to the tropes. So know when to ignore the tropes. The second thing, okay, so genre and subgenre, that's the most important thing, that the most important promise that your cover is going to make. The second thing is tone. And I'm going to show you examples. I did an Amazon search on the word clown, okay? Because, you know, maybe somebody wants to read a book about clowns, but what you get when you do a book, do a search on clown is going to be really different. So for instance, that's a book on serious clowning. This is a man who is a professional teacher of clowning and commedia dell'arte and the very serious theatrical art of clowning. Well, that's probably not necessarily what somebody is coming to see. But if I see this, I know what kind of a book I'm going to get. I'm going to know what the tone is. It's not going to be a laugh riot, okay? On the other hand, here was another book that came up. This is a picture from Commedia dell'arte, Arlecchino, The Servant of Two Masters, okay? And that's a kind of playful romance. That's a clown. All I did was I searched on clown, okay? This tells me that the tone is going to be fun, and there's going to be romance, and it's going to be, you know, a little bit more playful than, say, Clown Through Mask, which is going to be very serious. Now, this one is a whole other tone, okay? And why is it important to communicate tone? Because if the tone of the cover doesn't match the tone of the book inside, then boy, are you going to have a bunch of really confused and possibly angry readers, okay? If you put any of these images on any of these other books, can you imagine what that would do to the poor reader who, you know, sees the blood dripping from the face of the mad clown and buys a copy of Servant of Two Masters, reads this silly, you know, Italian Renaissance comedy about, you know, a clown who, you know, manages to make everything go, you know, completely haywire, and then everybody ends up in love and it's all wonderful. Well, those covers don't match in tone. And I've seen some covers where, you know, the cover was very light and playful, and in fact, the book was not. And so it's important for you, you know better than anybody what the tone of your book is. Make sure that the cover and that the promise that the cover is making matches the tone of the interior of the book. The third and final promise that your cover is making is subject matter. And that's separate from tone and separate from genre and subgenre, right? You can have science fiction, serious science fiction that is about a clown, a company of clowns in outer space. It's important that the tone is communicated, but that what is actually in the book gets communicated too. Okay. In the case of the Danielle Steele thing, what we have is what in The Princess Bride, the boy calls a kissing book, right? In the case of The Law in the Heart here, it's space and robots. And in fact, those do appear. It's a collection of short stories and they all appear. Much of it takes place in outer space, not all of it. They're wonderful stories, by the way, in case you are interested in that particular genre. In the case of the Goldfinch, it's a little bit harder to communicate what actually is inside, but it does communicate mystery. It communicates a sense of something's happening here and we're not quite sure what it is. Let's find out, okay? The important thing is don't be literal in terms of the subject matter. Don't feel like you have to show a scene from the book. Don't feel, in fact, don't. I mean, when in doubt, don't show something that actually happens, because then you're giving something away. Unless you can do it in a way that is playful, okay? Don't feel like you have to, if you've got a book on time management, you see it a lot. You see clock. Well, okay, that's maybe okay, but maybe there's a better way to communicate that, what the subject matter is, than just having a clock, because that to me is a little generic. So, make sure that your cover tells the reader, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, what's inside. And that's the third and final promise that we're going to get. Okay, so let's talk about do's and don'ts. We got our 3 promises. That's the largest do. Okay, make sure your cover is promising an accurate genre and subgenre, tone, and subject matter. Great. We'll take that as given. What are some other do's? You got to make sure that the promise works not just at your 27-inch monitor, full size zoomed in, or holding the paperback book in your hand, although it needs to work at those sizes as well, because people may see the cover at that size. What is the most common size for us to see a book cover at in 2020, 2021? Well, it isn't full size. It's what's called thumbnail. And it's basically, for all intents and purposes, 100 by 150 pixels. That's small. That's 1 inch by 1.5 inches on most monitors, okay? Less on a phone. So if you are looking at your book in terms of, okay, I got the genre and subgenre, it's there. I've got the tone, and I've got the subject matter, and it's communicating all of those. Well, make sure that it still communicates that at that tiny thumbnail size that will show up in Amazon and other bookstores lists, because that's going to be the size that people see it at first. And that's going to be the size that they click on to find out more about your book. So make sure that the thumbnail size is actually communicating. Okay, this is essentially the thumbnail size. This is actually a little bigger even than thumbnail size, but that's essentially it. All of these, I think that's one of the things about Timepiece, the steampunk book. that I'm least happy about is it doesn't do, I mean, the picture of the lady with the finger up, that communicates nicely. The gears and things communicate pretty well, but the typography doesn't work as well at postage stamp thumbnail size. The rest of them, I think, are very clear about, yes, they communicate all three of them. They make all of those promises at this size. Okay, this is a given, but it's important to state they should be visually attractive. Okay, and visually attractive is highly subjective, I recognize, but you'd be surprised how many covers aren't. And we'll look at some. So if you are not necessarily, as I was not to begin with, a visual person, make sure you use test marketing to make sure that people respond to it the way you think they should respond to it, okay? You shouldn't say, well, they should like this. Find out if they do, okay? And you can do that by going, if you have a mailing list, before you publish your book, you can say, hey, I'm having, and I've done this, we're having a poll. Which of these potential covers do you like best? And usually I'm able to figure out ahead of time which cover people are going to respond to. And we're going to talk a little bit about, what times that I've been surprised towards the end, okay? These are all visually attractive covers. The left one, I didn't design, Lisa Go, but I know from a lot of people telling me that it's a beautiful cover. That's a beautiful cover. The Crooked Kingdom is a lovely epic fantasy, a dark epic fantasy, and it communicates all of that very succinctly. The Twilight cover, I hate those books. I hate them with a passion. My daughters hated them with a passion. But that is a great cover because it is suggestive, it communicates tone, it communicates genre, and to an extent, subgenre. It created its own subgenre, paranormal romance, young adult paranormal romance. But it is a very attractive and efficient cover. Let's talk about some don'ts. And some of these are going to be a little hard to look at. And I'm pretty sure none of these are anybody that is in the meeting. So don't make it too hard to read. And that's fonts. Don't use too many fonts, but don't use fonts that are difficult. Don't use colors that are difficult. Don't use a lot of low contrast, especially when what you're dealing with is an ebook only. I tend to go pretty high contrast because that is really something nobody's ever going to hold a book in their hand. So as a piece of art, it needs to work in the small scale on the thumbnail and in the detail pages, rather than worrying about lots of color text and blurbs from reviews and things. We'll look at that in a little bit too. Don't use too many fonts. It starts looking like a hostage note. Joel Friedlander he doesn't have much hair left, but he pulls his hair out when he looks at that kind of stuff. Colors, use colors, be simple with colors. If you are not somebody who trusts your own visual sense enormously, stick to colors that work together well. And you can go online and look up good combinations, and there are all kinds of wonderful tutorials on how to match 2 or 3 colors. Let's look at some examples of not good. This is not good on about 8 different levels. Okay, first of all, those pictures are terrifying. I'm hoping that this is meant to be funny, because boy, it sure comes across as hysterically funny. But I wouldn't open it even if I was looking for funny horror, because that's terrible. It's got a bad combination of colors. It's got a terrible combination of fonts, and it's hard to read. even at this scale, which is larger than the thumbnail, I can barely read on my screen the 15 all new stories about the creatures, some alive, some, anyway, it's hard to read. At thumbnail, I couldn't see it at all. I hope you can see that. Okay. That's just ugly. This is creepy. And I love Chuck Palahniuk. Wonderful. And this is just to let you know, these are not all, indie and self-publishers. This is a big commercially published book. That I find unattractive and hard to read. It doesn't, I don't know what that's communicating. Here's an example of too much detail. This is this is Roz Chast. This is Penguin. It's got too much detail. For a print book that you're going to hold in your hand, that might be fun. I don't think it communicates the tone of the book terribly well. I mean, it's a funny book, but honestly, I don't know what I'm looking at here, okay? And I can't read it at thumbnail size. So make sure that you think through, what is it going to look small? Make sure that all of the elements are going to work together well. Font, color, and all of the other visual elements. Another do or don't. I mean, this is an example of all of the things that we're talking about. When I talk about thumbnail size, this is an Amazon listing. The search is on the keyword kunoichi. Now, the first two books that show up, those work at thumbnail, right? You can see what the book is. You can read the title. You can basically get a feel for the tone. The first one is a young woman in a black dress with two swords. I can see her very clearly. I get a sense that it's, if it's a kid book, it's a slightly racy kid book. The second book, which is mine, what I told the designer was that I needed it to have a particular sense of Japan. I needed it to have a sense of a girl, a young woman who learned to become an assassin. And I needed it to communicate a sense of mystery. And that's what he came up with. And good Lord, is that a great cover. Anybody see the third cover? Can anybody read the title? Anybody know what the heck is that, going on in that cover, and what the heck that white thing in the upper left-hand corner is? No. And so the likelihood that somebody who did a search on kunoichi is going to look at these three covers or the one down below, whatever, and that the one they're going to choose is going to be the third one there is pretty low, because it's not that it's bad. It's just, I can't see anything. It looks like it's mud. If I zoom in, I get a slightly better idea of what's going on. Remember, I talked about the lots of pictures of girls' backs with swords, and tattoos became a big thing over the last decade or so. Well, this is one of those. And you can read now The Ninja Girl. You can see that the white box is in fact the series. He never did write a second book in the series that I'm aware of. Then again, neither have I yet. I'm still working on it. I had to rewrite it yet again this year. So this is an example of a cover that on all counts doesn't work. If I were going to take this, I would, the art is okay. I would make sure that the girl was brighter than the background so you could see her. I might not have the series called out quite so much. And I would have the title be bigger so that you could see it in the thumbnails, size. Okay. Now let's talk about formats quickly. There, are three basic formats that you're going to release in: print, ebook, audiobook. The most important for most of us is the ebook, because that's where most of us get most of our sales. It also happens to be the least expensive to produce. So, that's something to consider. But it's important, when I can, I try to have all three formats available, because different readers like different things. And sometimes they want to buy both. I mean, a lot of my ebook readers will buy the audiobook as well and then be able to go back and forth and listen to the audiobook in the car and then pick it up and read it on the same page on their Kindle or whatever as they, get home and start reading. So it's important to know all of the different genres. The print genre is the one we think of the most. The typical size ratio of the cover is frequently 1.5 times tall and 1 time across. That's the ratio. The most common trade paperback and hardcover size is 6 inch by 9 inch in America. That's a standard trade paperback. The big identifying factor of a print book is that it's got a spine and a back cover. I love when I'm working on producing an ebook with a client, and they say, "Well, how about what are we going to put on the back cover?" And I'm like, "Dude, there is no back cover to an ebook. There are not back covers currently to most audiobooks because very few of them are sold on CDs anymore. Back covers are a print thing, and they're there to provide the same information that is up on the description in the online book page, okay? So it's helpful to have, the blurb, any wonderful reviews, the description, a bio of the author, maybe all the good stuff, often goes on the back cover. The whole point of a print cover is meant to be picked up, looked at, prodded. So things like finish, matte, or glossy are important. Those two choices are very personal, but often are linked to your genre. So there are genres, for whatever reason, a lot of romance is glossy. Science fiction is almost always glossy. A lot of other genres go for matte. People like matte. Some people like glossy. So think of it in terms of, an object that's meant to be picked up and examined closely, okay? An ebook is a slightly different ratio, which is annoying as hell, but it's one that fits the Amazon and Apple and all of the other, the website space that they've got for those covers. And it's 1.6 times as tall as it is wide. The pixel count that Amazon requests is 2560 tall and 1600 wide. Okay, and they usually will throw it back to you if it's any smaller than that. If you have a cover, for instance, a book that's a landscape book that doesn't match that, or I have a couple of square books that doesn't match that ratio, it will show up okay as long as it's got the minimum pixel count that we're looking at there. It won't fill the whole box. Okay, so for instance, one of my square books, it ends up showing up as it's small. It doesn't fill the whole space where the cover is meant to be displayed. And there's obviously no back cover. Audiobook is a square, and that goes back to the tradition of CDs. And so for years, it was 2400 pixels by 2400 pixels. Lately, they've been asking for 3000 by 3000. It is mostly important that you get it to work at a square size, which in terms of the art may require some moving around of elements. And I'll show you what that looks like a little bit in a second here. So here is the print edition of my young adult novel, Risiko. And that's 6 inch by 9 inch. And then here is the ebook. And you can see it's slightly narrower, okay? And in fact, it doesn't have as much space around it, if you look at it. The print edition is basically the same cover, slightly smushed in order to make it fit. And then there's space around the cover where I created a border, because print books have to have what's called a bleed that allows it to wiggle within the printer, because they can't print it exactly the same part of the paper every time. They have to give themselves some wiggle room. So you have to add a border of some sort. And this is the audio cover. And that is, I created that out of the ebook cover. I had to take the my name and the title and pull them out from the background and then float them over the central image. So that's kind of what you have to think about. You know, you may, depending on how your artwork works together, have to do more massaging as you move from one form to another, but this will give you a basic idea. Okay, this is history. Okay, this is the very first cover I ever created for Risco before the book was even finished. And it's okay. And this is early in my own training as a cover designer. Okay, I mean, you know, kind of tells us a bit of, I mean, it makes a promise of the genre, kind of. Certainly says Japan. It tells something about the tone. It's not light comedy. And it communicates, I think, the subject matter, sure, absolutely, Girl with the Sword. But it also isn't easy to read in thumbnail size, okay? This was the second version that I came up with, and it works a little bit better, except it fails on the genre subgenre category. I did a lot of research. When I designed this cover, I had been doing a lot of romance and erotic romance novels. And so when I pulled it together, what I discovered when I did my test marketing was that the people who responded to this cover most positively were readers in their 30s and 40s and 50s who were romance readers. Well, historical romance, this is not. So as it turns out, this made a bad promise, even though it was more legible and better at thumbnail size. Now here you get the ebook. And this is the very first draft that James Egan of Bookfly Design did this for me. And it's beautiful, but there were two problems with it, okay? One problem. The big problem was when I looked at it at thumbnail, what ended up happening was that if you look over to the left, you can barely see the sword. And so we found ourselves trying to figure out how do we make that work? Well, what we did is we took the series out of it. You notice that vertical text that I have on the left is the series. We took that out and that became the ebook cover that I'm still using and am very happy with. And you can notice when we pull that down there, you can see the sword a bit better. You can see her a bit better. It reads. The last one is the print one. And how is that different? Well, there's a couple of things that you'll notice are different. One I pointed out, it's got the border. It's, slightly smushed. But there's one other big difference. I was able to add a blurb on the front. I got a really nice review from Forward Reviews magazine. And I wanted to share that with people. I do a lot of, back in the day when there were such things as book conferences, and I could sell live, I sold a lot of copies of this book at anime and manga conventions, at science fiction and fantasy conventions. It sells well. And part of what it sells it is the cover. And having that blurb on the front, as well as another one on the back, is part of being able to sell it in person. But you'll notice at the thumbnail size, you can't read it. It just muddies it. It's just a red blur, right? So on the ebook, I wasn't going to include that. I left that blurb off to keep it cleaner and more attractive, okay? So there's fun with formats. How are we doing on time, Becky?
Oh, I was just sending you a message about that. I would say it's about 8 minutes to noon, and we would love to run that the poll before you're completely finished, so you can actually comment on the covers after we do the poll.
Okay, do you want me to take questions at this point? Because that's kind of, oh, cover resources. Let me talk to those.
Yeah, go ahead and do that, and then some questions would be great.
Okay, so the best resources you've got are your local bookstore and Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, Apple, and going and looking at what the best covers in your genre and subgenre are and how they do what they do. Look at them closely. What is it that, what promises are they making? How do they make the promises? What are the color palettes? What tropes show up in multiple books in your subgenre so that they're communicating genre, subgenre, tone, and subject matter, right? Another wonderful, wonderful resource, Joel Friedlander, who I mentioned, his website, thebookdesigner.com, has a monthly book cover contest. It's ebooks specifically, but a lot of them are also print, as well as ebook. And if you go, not only can you submit your own and he will give you feedback, which is incredibly valuable. More to the point, you get to see a whole bunch of audio and ebooks. And Joel started as a professional designer, and so is much more visually oriented to begin with than I was. And so his feedback is incredibly valuable, I find, looking at what it is he identifies as working and not working. He talks a lot about what are the, what's good and bad about the font choices, the typeface choices in the cover, the composition, where the title is, where the main visual elements are. He does a great job of saying, okay, this is what's great about this, and this is what could be a little bit better, and it's a wonderful master class. Okay, obviously coming to BAIPA meetings is phenomenal because you can see what other people are doing. In the introduction sections, everybody hopefully holds up their book. I didn't have mine this time, but you hold it up and you can see, okay, well, that's how they did that cover, what worked and what didn't work about it, and we can we can look at it, and people ask great questions and share great resources. So BAIPA is a wonderful thing. I highly recommend, if you really want to think deeply about how covers work, there's a wonderful TED talk by a guy by the name of Chip Kidd, who designed some of the most iconic covers of the last 20 years, 30 years. And the URL is there, and I'm going to share the slides, so you should get it. But if you just look up TED Talk, Chip Kidd, his talk, Designing Books is No Laughing Matter, okay, it is a hugely educational. It's about 15 minutes long. It's also hysterically funny. He's a very funny man. So I highly recommend that as another resource. Okay, and that's where I'm at. Do we want to take questions and then do the poll?
Yeah, okay, so there is a question about whether with an ebook box set, are there any different design rules?
Oh, I have done a box set in an ebook sense is basically a compilation of multiple ebooks, right? Whether it's a series or I mean, it can be either a series box set, or it can be a thematic box set where you've got multiple books on the same theme. And there's two ways of doing it, okay? One is to do a three-dimensional cover that looks like a literal box set, and I've done those, and they're fun because it communicates. This is three-dimensional, and it's multiple books. You're getting more than one book when you buy this, and that's nice. The problem is they tend to be wider than they are tall, when you create those kinds of box set images, in order to show that it's 3 dimensions, you have to make a wide, a wide image. And again, that space is 1 times wide times 1.6 times tall. That's what's going to be shown. So when you do that 3-dimensional box set, and if we want, I can show you some examples of that, but it will be, a little letterbox. It'll be, like that in the middle of the screen. Now, if you have a good cover and then it'll still communicate well, and that's a good thing. Another way that I've done it, and perhaps this works better, is to do a series. I always try to brand the series so that they have a similar cover, a similar, certainly a similar typography, similar color scheme, similar layout of the cover. And so I'll do a cover that is a standard 1 by 1.6 cover that looks like the box set, and then very clearly, usually at the bottom says, John and Harry series, numbers 1 through 8 or whatever it is. Because that communicates not necessarily at the thumbnail size, but at, when they come in and see it, if you do it big enough, they'll see the number 1 through 8 and they'll get, oh, it's a series. And you should always make sure that the other metadata communicated clearly as well, because you don't want somebody who's already read the whole series as individual titles buying the box set, because then they get annoyed. Okay. Another question?
Yep. Memoir question about, like, this wasn't early on when you were doing your sort of examples of different genres.
Yeah, I have, I've worked on a few, and memoir has the advantage in that, the trope in memoir is scrapbook, okay? So what you see on a lot of memoirs is photos that are clearly objects, photo objects, or other objects from the story. From the time and place of the story that communicate all of those other things. What is the tone? What is the subject matter? Where do these people live? When are we talking about? Picture of somebody, as a child, on a bicycle may not communicate much. But if it's a picture of a girl, on a bicycle in an overcoat with a little yellow star on her chest, that's going to communicate something. So see if you can find 1 or more pictures. The first book I ever published through my publishing company was a memoir, and it was of a gentleman who had been a merchant marine in the Second World War. And what we came up with was a bunch of pictures of him throughout that period of his life in different places, so that it looks literally like you're walking up to him and saying, hey, what was it like being a merchant marine during the Second World War? And he's saying, well, let me tell you. And he's telling you all about it. And it's actually exactly the tone of the book, as it turns out. There are other things about the cover I would do differently. The color scheme is not great, but that communicated it well. So in terms of memoir, think about if you've got either a photo or an object or a group of photos that communicate the when, the where, the who, the subject matter, and also the tone. Because that is the trope that will communicate memoir.
Okay. And there's a question in terms of genres, actually. So is fiction a genre, or romance the subgenre, genres? So really it's a question, I think, about what are we thinking of in terms of the genre?
Here's the thing. It is important for you as a publisher and an author to be aware of exactly what niche or niches your book fits, okay? There are many, many, many little subgenres. If you go to the BISAC, everybody know, if you know what BISAC is, it is the North American booksellers catalog system. And it lays out, and they revise it every 2 years. And it lays out all of the different genres and really small subgenres that are out there. And you can be in multiples. You know, you can be in you know, sweet teen romance, young adult romance, and in Old West, Western, right? You can be in multiples. But it's important that you know which ones you're in so that you know how to communicate what it is that is inside, because that's what your cover needs to do. And the other thing that you need to know about that is some of the booksellers, particularly Amazon, and some independent bookstores as well, don't pay attention to BISAC. So with Amazon, they often try to have their subgenres be whatever is going to be most likely to get their readers excited and to buy the books. So those shift a lot over time. And as new subgenres become hot, they'll add a new subgenre. And so, okay, again, you know, using an example that just happens to be in my head, the erotic romance cover that I showed you happens to be a polyamory, which is something I didn't even know existed as a subgenre, but it does. It's also bisexual romance, and that's the main subgenre for that book. And I think the cover shows that pretty well. Without being at all explicit, it communicates you're going to get a book in which 3 people, 2 of whom are the same gender, are going to explore an intimate relationship. I only know that that's a subgenre on Amazon because I looked, okay? And that's why I say you have to spend some time going on. If you've already published books, look at the also boughts, and then look at the lists. If you go down to the ratings, the rankings, where it ranks numbers, you know, if you click on any of those rankings, it'll show you the top 100 books in that subgenre or genre. Now, romance is not a terribly helpful genre to think about. Bisexual romance, on the other hand, is a much smaller subgenre, and therefore it's helpful for me to be able to go, again, I'm just using that because that's in my head, but cozy mysteries, like I said, sweet Western romance, young adult romance. All of these subgenres have lists on bestseller lists on Amazon. And if you look at them, you can look at the 100 best-selling books in that subgenre, and that will tell you something. It will tell you what are the tropes, right? And what ways does my cover fit this? And so does my cover make the promise that people expect? And to what extent does my cover not fit this? And therefore it stands out, and that's maybe good. You have to balance it. But mostly be aware of the tropes, because you're going to try to make sure you're letting the people know what genre, subgenre, tone, and subject matter is in the book. Did that make sense?
I think so.
Okay.
And the genres, as you described, are much more fluid and faster changing on Amazon than they
Much
are.
more fluid, and yeah, exactly. And so you need to keep looking at it. And to be honest, you know, it's one of the things. You also, one of the things that's insanity making about KDP and Amazon is that the genres that they offer you in the back end, the categories, don't show up necessarily on the front end. And so while there is a certain amount of, okay, if I select this category, it will show up in these lists, kind of works, but it doesn't always. And so sometimes you have to contact them and ask, can you put me in this subgenre, not that subgenre?
Right. Okay. And we're running, I'm not sure if we're going to get to all of our questions because we do want to run the contest as well. but I'm going to do my best here to get these out to you. In terms of editions and a new edition of the same book, um, and so if we have a successful first edition, obviously we want to build on that.
Yeah.
Any comments on a second?
Well, it depends. If you're happy with the cover, find ways to incorporate the same elements into a new cover. Make sure that it's clear that it's a new edition of the same book, okay? And that whether that's just adding a medallion or a large reading line somewhere, top, bottom, middle, that says revised new edition, exciting new edition, whatever. You can use the same cover. You don't, by the way, especially with ebooks, you can change your cover as often as you'd like, okay? So if you have a cover and it isn't working, change it. I had some covers that early on, especially when I was figuring all of this out, they were terrible. And I had to revise them 2, 3, 4, 8 times. There was one book that it took me a while to figure out, how do I communicate to people what this book is about? And it took a while. And to do it in a way that was A, attractive, and B, communicated the subject matter and tone and subgenre. So, you can change the cover as often as you like. If you have a cover you're happy with and you're coming out with a new edition, yeah, do try to incorporate as much of the old cover as you can, and just make sure that it's very clear somewhere that this is a different edition. And even if they can't read, if you add, like I said, a medallion, a star, some, circle, something, somewhere on the book, it will let them know, wait, I'm looking at these covers and they're different. Why are they different? And they'll look closer.
Okay, I'm going to actually put, while you're still answering questions, I'm going to put up the slide that has the covers in the contest.
Please.
I don't want you to comment on them, David. So just
I won't.
hold off on that. But I'm going to put these up so people can start looking at them. And 1 second. There we go. Okay, and then, so the next question we have is, so images, like especially for nonfiction business books,
Yep.
so many of them have kind of boring images. The question is, do you need an image at all?
No, and I'm not going to comment on any of these, but you'll see that at least one is barely of these images, of these covers that we're looking at, is barely graphic. I mean, it is not necessary. You can use typography to communicate a huge amount. If you feel that the title of the book sells the book without having to have any graphic embellishment, great. I find a picture is always helpful, but that's me. An image is often a great way. So even, if you look at Janice's there, I'm not going to comment on it in terms of quality. I'm just going to say, if you look at it, it does in fact have a graphic element to it. It's just subtle. Okay, and that's an example of how you can use graphics very subtly while keeping the title of the book as the main element in the cover.
Okay, and so a kind of interesting question about the relationship between the title of the book and the cover image. And when I went to this screen, my chat went away. Now I'm getting it back. I'll try. Okay, so could you speak to how the title and cover impact each other or don't?
Okay, I can tell you, and this is, I did worked with a client who was re-releasing a whole bunch of her previously commercially released romance books. And she came up with the first cover, and I had to tell her it didn't work. The title of the book was Sexy Lexi. Okay, it was in fact a romantic comedy. It was a very funny book. And what the cover that she came up with was a cartoon figure she'd found on Shutterstock or somewhere of a woman sort of jogging. It didn't say anything, and it didn't work with the title. Because at that point, I'm like, well, is that, there's nothing sexy about the lady in the picture. What tone is this supposed to communicate? I mean, what I'm assuming this looks like an exercise book. I don't know what this is, okay? Again, that sense of tone and genre and subject matter, they don't have to communicate exactly the same thing, but what they communicate should be in concert. And so sometimes you see cover images, cover art, and a title where they are actually ironically commenting on each other. That's hard, but if you can do it, great. But you got to be sure that you nail it if you're going to do it, because otherwise you're just going to leave people confused. Okay?
So what we're going to do right now, well, here's what I recommend is that that you maybe just make a note of the title of the 3 that you would like to vote for, because I think what's going to happen when I launch this poll is it's going to pop it up right in front of that image and make it hard. You'll be able to move it around, I expect, but you may want to just make a note now of the 3 that you would like to vote for. And again, I'm going to explain while you're looking around and making that decision that there are 6 questions each. So 1 and 2 have like set A, the first, and I just did it in the order that they're on the sheet. So the first 7 on the sheet are in question 1, and the other 7 are in question 2. If your choice is not in that particular grouping, just hit no void, no, hold on, I have to edit this. Edit, error. I'm going to try to, if it lets me. Okay. Please ignore typos. I'm just going to say that. I'm going to do my best to fix it. I may not be able to fix it. Okay. Never mind. That just went wonky. Okay. If it says no voice in this group, just please ignore that. That's an error. Okay. And I don't know if that view just changed for you. It might have. I'm going to try and restore it. I'm going to launch the poll. Let's see what happens. Let me try and restore that picture. David, is the picture up still? I don't think it was.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is the results. I am not seeing a poll. I am seeing your screen, Becky.
Yeah, my screen.
I'm seeing the question, the poll questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see the poll question.
I see the poll, but I don't understand the
No, what I'm
part
not-
2.
I am confused.
Becky,
Okay,
it's got radio buttons right now. You can only pick one.
yes,
Right.
one.
I don't even have that.
Huh?
Okay, hold on. So let me explain again.